I don't think I can go on this way anymore. I'm looking back on another day misspent. Oh, I'm familiar with disappointment. Say the word and I won't be far behind. Just say the word and I'll leave this all behind.
So, dear friends, hello again, everybody who has just joined us at the virtual platform, and whoever is watching us in Facebook and YouTube, because I'm reminding you that this year annual general meeting of European Business Association are in two formats, and you can choose whatever is more convenient for you. Just soon we'll begin the main part of our today's event, but before that I will remind you our main and senior partners, the partners of our event. The main partner is Visa Company, the senior partner is Saga Development Company. So before we come to the main part, let us remember this year, 2020, which is living and which brought lots of tests for everybody, and maybe not only negative tests. So now I give the floor to our first guest, that is Andriy Vabrish, the director of the company Saga Development, and we will speak with him what in fact happened this year. Hello, Mr. Andriy. As for 2020, it's not that easy to mention about 2020 without mentioning how complicated it is and full of different tests. Or maybe you found some positive. Yes, of course. First of all, it was rather interesting. Secondly, this was the year where we faced an unknown problem for us. I mean, a corona crisis. So knowing that everybody is ready for the permanent changes in those crises, we can see annually that something is changing. So we have a rather high immunity for those issues. But this was the first time when we faced something we don't understand that well. So if we look all together at what has happened, it's a huge challenge for us. If we speak about this year, how it happened, we summed it up in the following way. Uh, the children of the crisis are the courageous without fear. So we spent some time to analyze what is ongoing, to understand the nature of certain points. And it was rather complicated to rely upon the state, but we still created partnerships and relationships with the participants of the market. We helped each other, but we didn't give the market the opportunity to stop. It was the huge challenge for us, and we can see that these times have passed, and we are capable of rather better achievements which we saw before. So we consider it a very complicated but positive time for us. This is how the character is created, this is how we confidence is created, and how we have the professionalism. So I consider that this year is rather nice for the strong tests, which opens new opportunities for the next year. You said about the confidence. Do you have any confidence that the next year will be easier? Which tests are you awaiting from it? Well, we have different aspects of the context. There are certain issues connected with the global context, which is ongoing around us, and the impact of the elections in the United States, and the changes of the strategic policy in the European so-called European family of the countries around the perspectives of the development of the territories. Well, of course, they will all impact on what is ongoing at us, but if we even take that into consideration, we are a rather peculiar and separate country from the global trade connections, and in this case, it helped us. Well, of course, we can see, and we are expecting to see, not that professional actions from the state or the lack of professional actions which could help us, but still the business, in fact, has lots of mechanisms how to compensate lots of points. And if we are lucky enough, maybe again, as it happened this year, we will have certain points which will still give us an opportunity to develop ourselves, to find certain additional strengths for the growth in ourselves. So altogether, I consider that we don't have the worst situation in the European continent. So if we do everything properly, consistently, and we help each other, then maybe we will have the better support for the growth than lots of other European countries. Thank you so much. Well, you know, in 2020, to hear certain optimistic forecasts is not that easy. But we've done it. Thank you, Andriy Vavrish, the director of the company Saga Development. And before we come to our next guest, I would say that we should have the draw of the prizes. I know who gets those prizes, the prizes from Saga Development Company. In fact, those prizes could be drawn if you've registered in our virtual space that meet in one of the expo zones. You could register to get the gift, and now we know who is the winner, who gets this must-read set of books, the selection of books from Saga Development. That is Alexander Lazarev, the first winner, and the name of the second winner is Vitaly Vereshchagin. They are getting those prizes, and we are moving on. Now we have a second guest. We are beginning our main part in several minutes, but now we'd like to see Alexei Kredisov, the Director General of the company of EY. Just would you share your insights now? Hello, the same question is for you. Is there anything positive in 2020? Did you have any useful lessons brought out of it? And how can we overcome this year? How the business can overcome it? Thank you that you are waiting not and asking me not about the negative. Out of positive, yes, yes, we can find it. In spite of my rather conservative profession, and I'm always looking at the risks, there is certain positive. First of all, whatever is connected with the replacement, import replacement, and the local production and services, it seems to me it brought a nice growth. This is the first point. Secondly, whatever won because of the decrease of the local currency, I mean hryvnia. This is the local manufacturing, local services. This is the import replacement, which also brought to certain advantage to the growth. And for us as the country, we were lucky this year with the conjuncture of our goods which we export, in particular agriculture and metallurgy. This is also was a certain plus or advantage, and whatever it may sound ridiculous, still what we always were trying to fight with, that is the shadow economy, in fact it served a kind of a cushion during such a complicated and hard overall macro situation in the country, as a big share of the economies is not under so highlighted, it is in the shadow. Still, it helped a bit our population to cope better with those complications, with those hardships and economic crisis which we are now overcoming. Then the question is the follow-up one, which is logical. How long will this cushion be working? What's your forecast for 2021? What will happen there? What are you and your business and the country expecting from it? Well, this is when I can use my conservative approach because it seems to me that so far we are not stuck into the bottom. It seems to me, and this is my recommendation for myself and for all of the other businessmen, I wouldn't be that relaxed. I would be getting ready to even harder times because I think that next 6 to 12 months we will be getting prepared to the complicated and hard times, though statistically we can show sometimes some points of growth, what is shown by other global economies, and it's totally possible that Ukraine will show that as well. But those points of growth, the growth of GDP and any other indicators, will be with really low base. We shouldn't forget about that. So coming back to the pre-crisis times, lots of economists are waiting for 3 to 5 years to achieve that threshold. And for the developing markets, which is Ukraine, it could even take longer. So I'm still a conservative. But you were right to pose the first question. We should look at the opportunities. We are now living here and now during these times, so we shouldn't just sit and complain how unlucky we are. It would be totally improper. So before coming here, I was working for 4 years in Africa, so I know what can we be compared with. We have a wonderful country, we have a nice working business. This is not the best business in the world, but it's not the worst one. So let us just enjoy what we are having here and now. Thank you so much. We're getting ready to the worst, but we are hoping for the best. And the certain models how to work under these conditions are already being developed. Thank you. That was Alexei Kredisov, Director General of the company of EY. Our colleagues shared certain impressions of theirs, certain insights. We are coming closer to the main part of our event now, but we are still calm and optimistic. So I do invite all of you in our platform ZMeet, please take the seats in the auditorium. Just soon we'll begin everything. Just come to the screens and try to seem comfortable, though it is a virtual space. But if you're following us in Facebook and YouTube, like us, comment us, follow us. And now I'm giving the floor to the Executive Director of the European Business Association, Anna Derevyanko, and see you just after 6 p.m. with me personally. It will be interesting. So, dear friends, have a good day. Hello, I'm so happy. Well, not to see you, because I don't see you now, but I'm so happy to greet you all here. Well, I do hope that all of you are already equipped already and armed enough with your glasses of wine or some flavorable coffee or something else when you're in front of the TV screens or the screens of your computer, and we will spend with you the several next hours. So I thank everyone again who's joined our meeting, and as you can see, this year is a very interesting one. And just a year ago, during the previous general meetings, we couldn't even imagine that we were here with you meeting in the virtual reality. So honestly speaking, it's a bit of an unusual situation when in the audience, in the auditorium, we have just several people, but there, beyond the framework, we've got hundreds of people who are watching us and joined us. So, when we thought how to conduct this event, we first thought maybe we shouldn't conduct it, as lots of people have delayed or postponed or cancelled their corporative meetings and meetings. But we decided to do it in a different way. We decided that we need to try the new reality. We need to catch up with the time, and we need to offer you diverse, interesting points and fresh moments, taking into account your wishes, which you announced to us and mentioned to us. We understood that you need networking. That's why we were trying, together with the developers of the program, to do everything possible for you to greet each other, to communicate, to be able to communicate with each other without any issues. Moreover, I may say that maybe we need to introduce a new category or a nomination in our awards, the computer genius, because honestly speaking, sometimes virtual reality just makes us to be rather promoted and understanding different computer literacy points. But dear friends, I'd like to use this day to conclude, to sum it up a bit for the whole 2020, how we lived through it as a business, and what we need to strive for in the next 2021. So this year, was a very unpredictable one. As I've already mentioned, we never expected that it will be moving just in this speed and in this format. But still, this year, we taught something and started new things. We've changed a lot and we updated a lot. And I need to say that there are certain trends which we as an association, as the team, would like to separate and to present to you. So maybe you can agree with them, maybe not. And I'd like to begin with the first one, and to tell me that it seems to me that the first place in this ranking is our health, our strength, our capacity to be strong as the organisms to fight the microorganisms, because honestly speaking, this is the interesting time when microorganisms are sometimes winning. So the first place in our ranking is the health and our nice style of life to become stronger, and it really impacts all the other processes of our everyday life. So in March, it was the first lockdown taking place, and this was the consequences of the issues of health at the first place, and we as the business had to adapt to the new reality. So during our transition to the new mode, we felt that one of the main key trends which we faced was the total digitalization. We all were transitioning into online. First, it was rather interesting, but then we were so sick of it that, we were just out of strength and efforts to stand all of those e-processes. We had the lack of simple, pure emotions and just soul. So the second place is taken by emotional intelligence, emotional health, which was rather important to preserve. And I'd like to say, when we wanted to appoint KPI for this year, one of the member of the board, Tiberio Dimar, whom I'm just saying hello to, unfortunately he still has COVID, but I hope it's better, he said, we need to appoint the KPI last December. It should be digitalization. We should work on it. And I need to say the pandemics really helped us, because we have become so digitalized, so digital, that honestly speaking, sometimes we can envy ourselves with this skill. We launched the Telegram channel, the Telegram bot, and all together with you, we were in the online now. We began to use Zoom, Telegram, and you name it. In fact, lots of things which are done online still. The personal contact is always felt a certain lack of it. So we as an association decided to launch the personal managers to speed up or to make an intense work with you, because our cooperation for us personally is incredibly important. Moreover, to provide more fun in our life, we've launched this year and this week such a rubric, or I would say such a project, as the awards of EBA, where in different nominations we will point your investment into the development of our country and the development of EBA in particular. The next trend we are seeing is the wish to train ourselves, and this year, in comparison with the last one, we can see more people who desire to join different educational projects of the association. Last year we had approximately 10.5 thousand students, well, formally speaking students, and this year those are 15,000 who are taking part in different online programs, and the price of the training has become cheaper. And what else can we mention there? As the trend of this year, we can see that all of us are now in a kind of a hybrid uh, format of work, where sometimes we are working from home and sometimes we are working from the job places and offices. But in the majority of cases, we can see that people are working from their home offices. So we had to review all of the business processes in our organizations, and EBA, of course, is not the exception in this context. We, as an organization, really had to reconsider what we are standing on, how we are working, and adjusted ourselves as much as we could under the new reality, the new contemporary times, which allowed us to preserve the team, which is the key one for the service to be provided at the highest level for all of you. We saved it and preserved it almost without any changes. And for that, I do thank the team as well, because it's rather flexible and very professional. I really liked it, I adore it, and that is why I express my huge gratitude that my team is so cool. And of course, I thank our members, because without you, dear friends, there wouldn't be such teams. The next trend, which could be mentioned, is the activity of the small businesses. The small businesses suffered most of all this year, and we can see that lots of the people are really fighting for life as business, but still we saw that the small businesses really strengthened their wish to be trained to something new. And maybe the last trend I'd like to separate in my speech is the protection of the business interests. This year, as never before, it has become rather important and rather needed, as in the mode 24/7, we've been working as a team with you to solve all of the issues as soon as possible which are emerging in our agenda. And here we can speak about the work of the government, which really quickly decided to solve some of the problematic issues. And I may say that the efficiency of those solutions is not lower, but even higher. As for the individual lobbying, we can see that this year the efficiency so far is a bit lower than last year. It's at the point of 74% of the solutions for the business, but still we have something to work on. So I may say that this year we've opened 3 new committees. This is the Industrial Committee on Energy, the Industrial Committee on Industrial Policy and Sustainable Development. We've launched a separate project which will be based upon, or which will be focusing upon, the processing of the waste or the garbage, dangerous litter, within the Agrochemical Committee of the European Business Association. This year, we've been working in an active way in the customs sphere, the tax policy, and also the private sanitary laboratories, but still we need to do lots of things. And what we should speak about, it will be told by the president of the European Business Association, Tomasz Fiala. He will speak about the current issues which have to be added to the court reform and the change of the law enforcement authorities for them to be as efficient institutions. I can also add the necessity to create the independent regulator in the transport sphere, the basic legislation for the internal and water transport, and also the environmental control, veterinary legislation, and this blockage of the import and innovative plants protection means. And as for the regions, we've got 4 representative offices: Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and oh god, I just forgot the 4th one. Lviv, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Dnipro. Oh my god, thank you for the prompt. It's always so pleasant when there is some support, or sometimes I'm a bit too excited. So as for the regions, we can see that the business is still becoming a bit weaker, considering that the situation is changing and it impacts really the micro and small businesses. And we can see that the HoReCa and tourist business is now at the first place in the front line. The companies have suffered a lot, but still we are both in the center and in the regions. We can see that we still need to put the health onto the first place. And you know, in Monday we had the discussion in the board where some members of the board just raised the question whether it's worth to introduce the full lockdown but for the short period of time, or still we should support the idea of adaptive quarantine or the lockdown of the weekend. And I may say that the business doesn't have consensus which type of the lockdown should be introduced. Everybody understands and that it's better to have an awful end than the end, all without any end. So we decided to delegate these solutions to the government. I hope that we will hear Mr. Prime Minister today, who will speak about that as well. From our behalf, we just expressed our wish to the government to emphasize on the development of the healthcare system, its strengthening, for it to be working properly, and to emphasize on the primary line of the healthcare, for it to be a nice filter for people to get the proper support, and later to take care what can be done as a support for the business. So, that's what I'd like to mention about the trends. And finally, to conclude, I can't help telling a big thank you to you, dear friends. I understand it's so hard for you. Well, it's hard for all of us now. And I understand that sometimes you don't care about EBA and our meetings and some requests of ours, but I sincerely thank you that you are with us, that you support us, that you are constantly, loyally with us. So I really express you a great gratitude, and I wish you strong health, first of all, and I wish you really nice business. At this note, I'd like to give the floor to Tomasz Fiala for our speaking place, for him to produce his opinion for some of the points. And after he joins us, we are awaiting a rather tense agenda, because we've got lots of speakers who will be happy to tell you, well, not to see you because they don't see you, but still will be happy to communicate with you and to tell about your insights. So don't rush away, stay with us. Thank you. Tomasz Fiala now.
Thank you, Anna. Dear colleagues, dear distinguished members of our association, ambassadors, ministers, everybody who is watching us today, welcome to our 21st AGM. Let me first summarize the key developments that this unusual year has brought to us. If you recall, a year ago at our AGM, we have been very supportive in our assessment of the new administration and appreciated the fast and ambitious pace of structural reforms that has been taking place at that time. At our AGM, went through a long list of almost 24 priority areas of President Zelensky that we support. Also, some of them were unpopular or opposed by vested interests. We have repeated this message during our last meeting with the President and his key ministers in February of this year. Unfortunately, since March, the administration policies have started going in opposite direction. There have been setbacks in anti-corruption, in the rule of law, corporate governance, cooperation with our Western partners and institutions, increasing budget deficit and public debt, which will raise cost of funding for business, removal of credible reformers, and growing influence of vested interests, oligarchs, and pro-Russian forces, confirmed not least by recent decisions of the Constitutional Court. The list is unfortunately very long and concerning, so hereby we would like to call upon the President and his political party to return to the policies with which they were elected over a year ago, and which put Ukraine on the right track during the first 10 months of the President's administration. But there's not only sad news to report. Thanks to the good base built over the past years, including in 2019 under President Zelensky, Ukraine economy is one of the best performers in the region so far this year. After dropping over 11% in the second quarter, the decline in the third quarter has decreased to only 3.5%, and the economy remains only 2.9% below its pre-pandemic level, which is one of the best results in our region, with the only exception being Poland. Salaries and retail sales are above pre-pandemic levels. Thanks to the cleanup of the banking sector since 2014, Ukraine has for the first time passed this crisis without a currency crisis, without a run on deposits or liquidations of banks. Also, the recent intensification by the President and his team of talks with the IMF is a step in the right direction. And last but not least, our COVID statistic is so far not the worst in the region. Also, it is skewed by low levels of testing. Finally, let me say a few words about the EBA. Firstly, I would like to thank Anna and her team, as well as my fellow board members, for your invaluable input and the much-needed creativity this year. We were the first to adapt to the pandemic and start servicing our members fully online from March without any interruptions and hiccups. We stress-tested our operations and budget already back in April and reduced costs to be ready for quite negative scenarios. They have fortunately not materialized, but we should be ready to operate under current circumstances until next spring. Secondly, I would like to thank our members for staying active and interested in EBA. We are very grateful to the committees and members in general for bringing to the attention of our executive team and our board the most pressing issues your companies and your industries face, and we are happy to help and communicate those to the authorities. To conclude, I would like to wish all of you to come through this winter in good health and your businesses with the least damage from expected lockdowns, which are probably hard to prevent. On this note, I would like to conclude. I'll ask you to stay with us for a couple minutes for us to rearrange the furniture here a little bit, and we'll start with our first panel that Anna kindly allowed me to moderate. Thank you. So we are back from a short break. Welcome back. I would like to start our first panel. We have two distinguished guests, both from abroad. We have with us from Washington, Jeremy Rosner, managing partner of GQR. It's a leading international political consultancy that has advised many political parties and candidates in elections all across the world, in almost 100 countries, including Ukraine. And we have Andrew Metheny with us from London, from Goldman Sachs. He's senior economist who covers our region and will tell us a bit about his expectations on global development of macro as well as his forecasts for Ukraine. Let me start with Jeremy. Jeremy, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us.
Tomasz, it's great to be with you and the European Business Association. Andrew, it would be better if I could be with all of you in person today in Kiev, but I'm delighted to be with you. I want to take a few minutes to describe what happened in the US election 16 days ago and what it may mean for Ukraine and the region. The top lines are by now well known to all of you. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the next president and vice president of the United States after winning what turned out to be a relatively decisive victory. When all the votes are counted, they will have won about 80 million votes to Donald Trump's 74 million votes, a margin of about 51 to 47%, about a 4-point margin. And Joe Biden will have won the same number of electoral votes, 306, that Trump won in 2016. Now, Trump, as everyone knows, is loudly denying the outcome, and his denials and his legal tactics with Rudy Giuliani and his refusal to cooperate in the transition, are all troubling in terms of the health of American democracy. But at this point, there is no sign that any of them will prevent Biden from taking the oath of office on January 20th. In our lower chamber in the House, Democrats surprisingly lost seats, but will still retain the majority of about a dozen seats, maybe around 223 to 212. That will give Democrats the narrowest majority in the House of Representatives in 20 years and will put them at real risk of losing the majority in 2022, since historically the president's party in the first year after a new president is elected tends to lose about 25 seats. The only time that's not been true since World War II has been in 1998 and 2002. In the Senate, Democrats also did less well than expected, gaining only 1 seat so far, but there will be runoffs for 2 seats in the state of Georgia on January 5th, and if Democrats win both of those, then they'll have functional control of the Senate. That's difficult for them to do. It's not impossible, but the odds are probably against them winning both. Finally, Democrats had a relatively disappointing result in the lower level positions in our state legislatures, where they failed to flip control of any of the chambers in the state legislatures. And that's crucial since the state legislatures draw the lines of federal congressional districts starting after the 2020 census. And so the result was positive for Democrats at the top, disappointing underneath that. One writer has called it a devastating victory for the Democrats. There are 5 things I want to flag about the results, and then I'll speculate about the impact. First, turnout was historical. It was the highest in American elections in 120 years. 67% of people voted, and that's especially impressive in light of the pandemic. We've been tracking elections around the world since the pandemic started in March. And of all the major national elections, turnout has been down by about 3 points, but it was up very substantially here. There have been a couple countries, such as North Korea and New Zealand, who took extraordinary steps to protect the health of voters when they were voting. And that produced some gains in those countries. Indeed, South Korea had the highest turnout in 28 years, but ours was the highest in 120 years. Uh, One of the huge mistakes that Donald Trump appears to have made was in disparaging mail-in voting, which was the way the US shifted in order to deal with the pandemic. Huge, huge switch to mail-in voting. Um, and it was only about 40 million people voted by mail early in 2016. It was about 100 million this year. And by disparaging it, he led a lot of his people to avoid voting at all. And so he lost the mail votes by about 2-1, and that difference may have sealed his fate. Now, high turnout isn't always a great thing. Sometimes we see that before civil wars. But at least it shows a high degree of participation, especially by some groups that haven't participated as much in the past, including minority voters and young voters. The second thing is, this was fundamentally a referendum on Donald Trump, as are most elections in the US for presidents running for re-election. Our research showed for the last 4 years and the last 2 years, our congressional by-elections in 2018, that Trump was the only issue on the ballot for many people, either that you loved him or you hated him. And he was ultimately trapped by his fundamentals. His approval rating stayed between 40 and 45%. Over 90% of the days he was in office. Ultimately, he got 47%. Fundamentals matter. And it's interesting, ultimately, this election wasn't so much about COVID, and I know Andrew will talk about that. It wasn't about the economy. Indeed, counties with higher levels of COVID actually voted more for Trump than those with lower levels. So, and similarly on the economy, it wasn't clear that the economy drove it. Our politics have shifted from material things like the economy and health to more questions of identity and race. Third, I think it's notable that Trump made a bad bet by sticking with his strategy that he had all throughout his presidency of just focusing on his electoral base. You know, savvy political leaders around the world, and as Tomasz said, we've worked in 100 countries or so. We see savvy leaders adapting to changing circumstances with new strategies. In Britain, for example, we see the departure of Dominic Cummings and Lee Cain as a sign of Boris Johnson tacking more to the center in a more temperate style. Trump never showed that kind of political agility, and instead doubled down on trying to drive up his base among rural, exurban, white voters, especially evangelicals and those without a university education. Now, he increased their turnout, but Democrats increased their turnout much more. And so ultimately, it was a losing strategy. Fourth, there's a huge story that's not been much appreciated, which is that most of the Democratic gains came from the center of this political spectrum. There is a brewing fight in the Democratic Party between the centrist and left wings of the party, and that will continue and be a big factor. But, you know, Joe Biden was pretty much selected for the job of mobilizing moderates, and he did that. When you look at the exit polls, his biggest gains were actually among, relative to the 2016 vote, his biggest gains were actually among white voters, especially white men. White men voted for Donald Trump in 2016 by a 32-point margin. They still voted for Donald Trump this time, but Joe Biden cut that margin in half. Moderates moved very heavily toward Joe Biden. Independents moved very heavily toward Joe Biden. So this was a big movement in the center. Fifth, you know, this election was another data point in a decades-long process of really poisonous political polarization in America's politics. There's been a long-term decline in trust across the spectrum in our major institutions, dating back about a half century, back to the Vietnam War and Watergate. Less trust in the media, in the courts, in the police, in the military, in Congress, in the presidency, and more consolidation and separation between the two partisan camps. Also polarization in terms of education. The biggest predictor right now, partisan preference, is whether or not you have a university degree at one end or never went to college at the other end. And that divide is going to continue. There's, no matter who wins the White House, that divide is being driven by huge forces of media and demographics, and it's really troubling for our country and has some implications for Ukraine that I'll talk about. So let me just close with what all this means for Ukraine and its relations with the US and Europe. If we assume that Joe Biden won't, and the Democrats won't have control of the Senate, we won't know till early January, then Joe Biden's ability to accomplish much on domestic policy would be very, very limited. But on foreign policy, the US president has almost unlimited room for maneuver. And that has enormous implications for Ukraine. There's going to be a sea change in many ways, at least in the perspective of the President of the United States when Joe Biden takes the oath of office. As you all well understand, Trump suggested at one point that Crimea belongs to Russia because people there speak Russian. Biden would never suggest something. Trump viewed Vladimir Putin as a good buddy. Biden, I think it's safe to say, views Putin as a dangerous thug on the geostrategic stage. According to John Bolton, a re-elected Trump might well have withdrawn the United States from NATO. Biden has decades of support for NATO. He helped lead the process of enlarging it when he was the leading Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He has enormous respect for Ukraine's European and NATO ambitions. Trump knew very little of Ukraine before becoming president, perhaps apart from its beauty pageant contestants. Biden has been focused on Ukraine for decades. He visited there 6 times as vice president. And all this applies to Biden's team as well. People like Tony Blinken, Michelle Flournoy, Senator Chris Coons or Chris Murphy, Susan Rice, the sort of people who may be the next secretaries of defense and state. Michael Carpenter, who may run the Ukraine portfolio for Joe Biden, has been close to Biden for years. All these people are enormously knowledgeable about Ukraine. They have years and years of record of strongly supporting Ukraine's independence, its sovereignty, and its European path. And so I think that's quite a change. Now, for sure, a Biden presidency is no silver bullet for Ukraine. I think it's a clear bet that Biden will keep up a good deal of pressure on Ukraine to accelerate its anti-corruption agenda, just as he did as vice president, and that may prove difficult in our relations at times. There are also some ironic counter-pressures at work. Trump was worried about looking too pro-Russia because of the various scandals that came out about his links to Russia in 2016. And he also loved reversing anything that Obama had done. It was one of the driving forces of his presidency. As a result, he ended up, as you know, providing the anti-tank weapons that Obama had denied to Ukraine. Conversely, while Biden will come into office very wary of Putin and warm toward Ukraine, he will probably take steps to avoid any sense of being too favorable to Ukraine, given the stories about his son and Burisma. But all that will likely be at the margins. Ultimately, in addition, a change of US presidents will have a limited impact on Ukraine's hardest challenges. A friendlier American White House won't stop Russia's aggression in the Donbass and the Sea of Azov, and it won't solve Ukraine's domestic problems from corruption to inefficiencies in the industrial and agricultural sectors. Biden will, I think, try to rally more support for Ukraine, but with Merkel on her way out and other leaders in Europe hobbled by COVID, I think the chances for huge breakthroughs, are not so dependent on American attitudes. I think if I had to direct people on what to watch, I would look not so much at Biden, but at the Republicans. One of the products of political polarization in our country is that the Republicans have swung wildly in recent years in terms of their attitudes toward Russia and the region. The Republicans were always the most avidly anti-communist, anti-Russian party in American politics. But when Donald Trump took office, that swung radically. Support among Republicans in the United States in his first 2 years in office more than doubled. And at this point, confidence in Vladimir Putin is 3 times higher among Republicans than among Democrats. I think it's not determined how Republicans will settle when Trump leaves office, whether they will revert to their more Russo-skeptic history, or whether they will stay with Trump's very favorable views toward Russia. And I think that's really an open question and maybe the most consequential question in many aspects of our relations. There are many other questions about the election. As a pollster, I know some may have questions about what happened with the polling. I'm more than glad to talk about that, but why don't I stop there, Tomasz, and thank you all again. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just to follow up with you, when do you expect the lineup of Mr. Biden's team to be known in the key positions like Department of State? When would you expect him to appoint the ambassador to Ukraine? We haven't had a permanent ambassador from the U.S. in Ukraine for quite a while. When do you think there will be clarity on the personnel front?
Yeah. Usually the secretaries of defense and state are named pretty early and often before the inauguration. I remember, I was in the Clinton administration, in the first Clinton administration. I remember Warren Christopher being named around Christmas time, a little before. And so I think you'll see the secretaries of state and defense named, before the end of the year. I think the ambassador probably gets named sometime after. There's going to, our Senate has to confirm all cabinet positions and ambassadors. And if it's a Republican Senate, they're going to have quite a stranglehold on Biden's nominations. And I think they'll generally give him his cabinet. But there will
we have lost the connection to Jeremy for a little while. Do we hear Andrew? Do you hear us? No, I guess we have lost connection with both. Okay.
I've got you now.
Jeremy, sorry. Now you are back. Now we can hear you again.
Okay. I don't know where I got cut off. Tell me where you lost me.
You mentioned, we heard about the expected appointments of the Secretaries of State and Defense, and you mentioned that the ambassador would be appointed later after the inauguration.
Yeah, I'm just saying that if Republicans control the Senate, they will have to approve all these nominations at the highest level. Mm-hmm. That will make for a difficult process.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And last question, when would you expect President Zelensky to have his first chance to meet with President Biden?
I don't know the answer to that. That's smarter people than me will have to answer that. I think there is this tension that he doesn't want to, because of the history with his son, he doesn't want to appear too close to Ukraine. But I think he cares a lot about Ukraine. And so I think it will be not the first phone call he makes, but I would be surprised if it wasn't in the first 20.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you very much, Jeremy. So let us switch to Andrew. Andrew is a senior economist of Goldman Sachs, based in London, as I said before. He is a frequent visitor in Ukraine and in the region, has been covering Ukraine for a long time, and he will talk first about Goldman Sachs' global economic outlook and its implications for Ukraine and his expectations. Andrew.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm like Jeremy, sad not to be able to be there in person with you. Let me, as Thomas mentioned, go through our global as well as our Ukrainian economic outlooks and some key market views that we have as well. Globally, our economic forecasts are very much on the bullish end of the spectrum. we're expecting a V-shaped recovery in global growth led by advanced economies. So we have a rebound in global growth to 6% in our forecast for 2021. This is above consensus in the IMF's forecast of 5.2%, and this follows from our projection for nearly a 4% contraction in 2020. The main reason for this bullish view, or the two main reasons for this bullish view are as follows. First of all, we treat the COVID shock fundamentally as a temporary supply side shock, and the reason for that is that we do expect to continue to get positive news on the vaccine front. We expect the U.S. regulators to approve a safe and effective vaccine by January, and we expect mass distribution of a vaccine by the middle of next year, at least in the U.S. and in Europe. And that we think will go a long way toward alleviating the effects of this pandemic, and will allow a return to pre-COVID economic life, meaning that the hospitality industry, as well as airlines, these types of sectors can start to bounce back. The second reason that we hold this view is that the shock has obviously had very adverse demand side effects on the economy. Many people losing their jobs, businesses seeing hits to their incomes, but these demand side effects have been offset by the exceptional degree of stimulus, both on the monetary and on the fiscal side, that you've seen in advanced economies in particular. Just to give an example of this, if you look at U.S. disposable income in the second and third quarters of this year, it was actually up, and this was given the unemployment checks that were being made out to people, and notwithstanding the fact that tens of millions of people lost their jobs. Moreover, on the demand side, we've done quite a bit of work looking at evidence of permanent loss of output, evidence of scarring effects, both in the labor market and with respect to the bankruptcies, firm bankruptcies, and we found very little evidence of this so far, at least, which is quite encouraging. As far as the EM outlook is concerned, the EM economies tend to have less fiscal and monetary policy space, but we expect that a rebound in Europe and in the U.S., these will be tides that lift many boats, including in EM, and so our EM forecasts are by and large above consensus as well. I would say the main exception to this is actually China. In China we see growth at 7.5% next year, versus consensus of about 8%. And the reason that we're a little bit below consensus is that we think the Chinese authorities, who by all accounts, manage the pandemic and the spread of the virus very effectively, actually at this stage need to put their foot on the brake a little bit, and withdraw a little bit of the stimulus that they have implemented this year because of financial stability concerns ultimately. And we think that the strengthening RMB will also hold back growth to some extent. As much as our global growth views are very positive for next year, we would still emphasize that risks in the near term are tilted to the downside, both globally but especially in Europe. And this is on account of the the second wave of COVID infections that we're seeing, which is being met in many places with renewed tightening of lockdown measures, and in some cases full national lockdowns that are being put in place. We're seeing across advanced economies, as I mentioned, exceptionally easy monetary policy, and we expect this to be maintained for the foreseeable future. Main central banks globally, we see policy rates remaining on hold through 2025. We see asset purchases ongoing in the case of the ECB. We see a step up in asset purchases in December. We see risks of rate cuts into negative territory in some jurisdictions as well. The market implications of this have been basically a global flattening of the yield curve, and also of the U.S. yield curve. We've seen a weakening of the dollar. We've seen risk assets that have rallied quite considerably post-U.S. elections. And all things considered, this amounts to a significant easing of financial conditions, and one that is particularly beneficial for emerging market economies. Just to give you a bit of a flavor of some of our global forecasts, our 12-month forecast for the oil price for Brent crude oil is $63 a barrel. Our target in 12 months' time for the S&P 500 is 4,300, and we expect U.S. Treasury yields to rise, but only gradually. We see the 10-year Treasury yield at 1.3% by the end of next year. As I mentioned, the implications for EM are quite benign. Commodity prices have been supported, and we're structurally bullish there. The carry trade is coming back into vogue, and you're starting to see net inflows into EM local currency. Debt expectations, as Jeremy mentioned, are for the Biden administration foreign policy to be, by and large, pretty positive for EM, more internationalist, more predictable, some détente in trade wars with China. And we think that, but despite this, we think that medium-term risks in EM economies have risen, especially on the fiscal front, and this is, given the widening of deficits and the hit to growth that we've seen, from this shock. And Ukraine, falls in this bucket as well, although Ukraine has obviously seen a bit of a smaller hit than elsewhere. Turning to the Ukrainian outlook, Ukraine entered this COVID crisis from a position of strength. Ukraine had built up FX reserves, had seen debt to GDP fall to a low of about 50% as of the first quarter of this year. And with a flexible currency, credible policies, sound banks, coming into this crisis, we thought this pointed to a shallower contraction in output and a quicker rebound thereafter than Ukraine has experienced in previous crises, and also relative to other countries in the emerging market space. And that is very much, we're very much on track for that outlook to play out. The third quarter GDP print came in earlier this week, down 3.5% year on year. This was significantly above consensus, and with modest sequential growth in the fourth quarter of this year, puts us on track for a 4% contraction for the full year, which is our forecast, but well above consensus and official forecasts, which have been more or less for a 6% contraction. Following this contraction, we expect growth to rebound next year to 5.3%. This is partly on account of this global view, whereby we expect the global economy to support trade and support a Ukrainian recovery. But it's also partly this view that Ukraine is just much more resilient to shocks than it has been previously. The currency adjustment helps to cushion the blow, and so we should see a relatively robust recovery. As I mentioned, near-term risks, in Ukraine as well, are still tilted to the downside. The COVID situation in Ukraine continues to deteriorate. We've seen, an imposition of lockdown on the weekends. There's a material risk that you may get, a more significant tightening of lockdown measures in Ukraine as well. And even if those don't come in Ukraine, Ukraine will probably import some weakness from Europe, where the lockdowns are in full swing at this stage. In Ukraine, macro indicators are at an inflection point. We saw FX reserves build up to $29 billion, which is the peak in August. Debt to GDP troughed earlier this year. Both are now reversing. We're seeing FX reserves start to decline. Debt ratios have deteriorated, both as revenue has deteriorated, but also as there's been some degree of fiscal stimulus, and the weaker hryvnia has also contributed to the rise in the debt ratios. Large foreign capital inflows since 2016 were really the main driver of the strengthening of the hryvnia that you saw from 2016 through early 2020. This was supported by conservative macro policies, the IMF program that was in place, a lot of initial optimism about the Zelensky administration and the reforms that it promised, an NBU policy that was aimed at disinflating inflation expectations, and in doing so ran very high real rates that attracted considerable inflows into hryvnia denominated debt. This backdrop is now behind us. Since March, we've seen a change in government from a very technocratic reformist government to a more political government. You've seen a change in leadership at the NBU that has, in the eyes of the market, called into question its credibility and independence. You've seen attacks on anti-corruption institutions. All of this points to a near-term modest deterioration in Ukraine's credit metrics. That said, the buffers are still very considerable. Ukraine runs very orthodox fiscal and monetary policies. still does, even if these are to some degree being called.
Okay, we lost contact. I think we'll wait for a minute.
There have been lasting structural changes to the economy.
Andrew, sorry for interrupting. We lost contact a little bit. You spoke about last we heard about the buffers, the fiscal or the fiscal and the monetary policy being still relatively conservative despite the easing recently.
Yes, yes. So I mean, what I was saying was that you know, the near-term outlook, you know, doesn't look as bright as, you know, we would have said, you know, maybe 12 months ago, but the buffers are still very considerable, and you know, and I think the positive trajectory is still in place. You know, and there have been lasting structural changes to the economy. The transition to a floating currency, which acts as a natural shock absorber, moderates the business cycle. Cleanup of the banking sector and the elimination of gas sector subsidies, you know, both of which were, you know, huge fiscal risks and drags. You know, and also the shift in trade away from Russia toward Europe, away from metals toward soft commodities and non-commodities. The recent, you know, development of the, you know, the IT sector. This has all had a stabilizing impact on, you know, on the balance of payments and also on growth. You know, two last things that I want to touch on. You know, one is that, you know, we are seeing, you know, some differences between the Ukrainian government and the IMF currently being exposed as political realities have set in. But this is, you know, really not too different of a pattern from what we, you know, observed in the later years under the Poroshenko administration, you know, where, you know, some of the reforms, you know, became politically inconvenient, where, you know, you saw a pattern of going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You know, and the fact that, you know, there are now delays to implementation of the IMF review, you know, is a natural product also of Ukraine having lower macro vulnerabilities than it had previously. The fact that Ukraine needs the money less is, you know, a simple reason why, you know, it's not getting the money as quickly. There's a lot of market focus on the next IMF review. We think the bigger question is longer-term cooperation with the IMF, given that the program expires in a little bit more than 12 years' time, you know, and also the longer-term economic priorities of the, you know, of the Zelensky administration. You know, lastly, just some large, outstanding structural and institutional reform issues that, you know, that I think are pretty relevant. One is, you know, will we see follow through on land reform and on privatization that will, you know, help to attract investment, that will help to, you know, raise the investment to GDP ratio, which relative to peers is, you know, is really too low. And this is a key factor that is, you know, holding back growth structurally, we think. I mean, and remember that Ukraine faces a very significant headwind to growth from demographic factors, with an aging population, with you know, with low birth rates, with, you know, with ongoing outward migration. Second, judicial reform and improving the rule of law, improving the attractiveness of the business environment. You know, these are issues that are, you know, constantly raised by foreign investors as the major impediments to investment. Reform of law enforcement and the security services. This is what needs to be done, you know, to raise FDI, to raise investment. Lastly, reducing the influence of business interests on political processes. This is, you know, this has also been a you know, a major impediment to, you know, passing, you know, market-friendly, growth-friendly reforms. You know, this is one of the, you know, one of the most significant issues, in my view, you know, in the last, you know, in the last 25 years of Ukrainian history. Let me maybe stop there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Andrew. You covered really a lot of ground. It was very insightful. Just a few follow-up questions. You spoke about fiscal policy being a little bit more relaxed, but still relatively conservative. I mean, the budget deficits for this year are set at 7.5%, and for next year, the first draft is at 6%. Do you think Ukraine is in a position to finance such large budget deficits this and next year? And If yes, from what sources? If not, then what are your expectations that these budget deficits will actually turn out to be?
Yeah. So first of all, shifting from a 7.5% deficit in 2020 against a large contraction in output to a narrowing that deficit to 6% in 2021 against a projected significant rebound in output, actually represents a significant fiscal loosening. This is something that the NBU board has noted. This has been a concern that's been raised by the IMF. We would expect that when the second draft of the budget goes through, you will probably see a somewhat smaller deficit there. As far as financing is concerned, this year, financing the deficit has not been a particular constraint. That's obviously been helped by considerable foreign inflows, but we've seen, the NBU and the Ministry of Finance also, build up the local debt market, considerably. You're seeing refinancing operations, from the NBU help to support bank lending, and you're seeing bank balance sheets, which are actually have quite a bit of hryvnia liquidity, being deployed to buy government bonds. That goes a long way toward financing that deficit. If Ukraine does not have market access next year, does not get any official sector inflows, then there clearly will be some challenges. But that's not our base case. We do think an IMF review will come through. We do think that the current market environment will allow Ukraine to tap the Eurobond market and get financing that way as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What is your forecast about the exchange rate of the hryvnia for this and next year?
So as I mentioned, we've seen we've seen FX reserves steadily rise over the last couple of years, peak in August. We think from here you're likely to see a gradual downward trend in FX reserves on account of two factors. One, a moderate current account deficit that Ukraine is likely to run, and the second, sizable external debt redemptions that will weigh on the balance of payments. So we think FX reserves are likely to decline somewhere into the low 20s by the end of next year. And this is a factor that we think will imply a gradual depreciation of the hryvnia. So we're expecting a depreciation to 29 hryvnia against the dollar in 3 months' time, 30 against the dollar in 12 months' time. So gradual, but not a sharp depreciation.
Mm-hmm. And my last question, you mentioned that various countries are reintroducing lockdowns, including Ukraine introducing a weekend lockdown last week. What would you, it is expected in Ukraine that probably the weekend lockdown is not going to have the desired effect based on what we have seen in other countries. Based on your experience, what would be kind of a model smart lockdown that Ukraine could consider? Are there some benchmarks that we should look at? Is it the countries in Central Europe or Israel or some others that you would recommend to look at that have the maximum health effect on the one hand, but have the minimum negative effect on the economy?
Yeah, I think that the challenge is, clearly there's not a lot of appetite anywhere in the world to impose lockdowns if they're not, absolutely necessary. And so, many policymakers are, obviously watching the COVID infection rate, but they're, also, more importantly, probably watching the hospitalizations, the fatalities, and the degree to which the health system can cope with the spread of the virus. And there in Ukraine, like elsewhere in the region, the signals are somewhat worrying, which is why we got the weekend lockdown, and why there clearly is a risk that you may need some further tightening. I don't think there's a silver bullet in terms of controlling this this virus and its spread. Lockdowns, the strictest forms of them, especially, are clearly effective, but also very economically damaging. We've found some evidence that some less economically damaging measures like imposing a face mask mandate and really enforcing compliance with some of these softer measures does tend to have some meaningful effects without having as large costs. So that's perhaps something that the authorities could consider.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you very much, Jeremy to Washington and Andrew to London. It was great to have you with us. Looking forward to see you in person in Kiev after we are done with COVID. And thank you very much to everybody for watching this first panel. We'll have a short break of 2 or 3 minutes, and then Anna will launch the next panel with Ukrainian politicians. Thank you.
Dear friends, and hello again. I may say that we are having a very friendly and warm atmosphere here, and we're all communicating here and looking which are the advantages of the new reality which we are trying to get used to as soon as possible. So now, during an hour and a half, we are waiting for the speeches and opinions of 8. Oh my God, how do I say? From the 8 people, right? So this is a very serious representatives who are impacting the policy in Ukraine and politics. I'd like to introduce Mikhail Saakashvili, the president of Georgia. Well, there cannot be ex-president. There can be just president. Kirilo Shevchenko, governor of the National Bank, and Mattia Masikas, ambassador of the European Union in Ukraine, and of course we'll have online the ambassador of the United Kingdom, the ambassador of the United States, and also the resident representative of the International Monetary Fund, Gösta Lungman, and also we are expecting of Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, and Vera Platonova, who is the senior vice president of the Visa company, and of course Sergei Marchenko, the Minister of Finance. So we're waiting for lots of speeches, and I'd like to give the proper tone to the discussion and to say that 2020 is not that easy. The main thing is for the next year not to be even worse. Will it be better? And which lessons we brought out of this year? These are the questions to our guests today. So I will begin with you, Mr. Mikhail. You are, on the one hand, looking as a person who seems to be not Ukrainian, though you are Ukrainian, in fact, but on the other hand, you have a huge world experience. So how does it seem to you, 2021, can it become better? What we should consider for as the business community, as the people? Well, it will be hard, it will be complicated because we wasted time. Because we have diverse audience, I will try to speak in English then. Well, first of all, I'd like to say in a nutshell what we are doing.
That's preparing draft laws. We did the draft law of subsoil extraction, which is a disaster in Ukraine because in Ukraine you have on the one hand amazing number of subsoil resources. You have rare metals and so huge potential for the small nuclear reactors, which are case of the future, as well as space technologies. But on the other hand, you just buy a license, you go there, and then you are met by a number of local activists, local council members that basically are extracting money in order to, if you want to do something. And basically you cannot do anything. That's a huge problem. We have now this draft law prepared. It was supported by at the National Council of Reform by every actor. National Council of Reform, I have to remind you, it's an advisory board chaired by the President. It has Prime Minister, member of head of the Speaker of the National Rada, all major committee chairs, all the major ministers. They all supported it. Okay, so let's see whether it passes. And we also have support from the Natural Resources Committee of the Parliament, Mr. Bondarenko, who is cooperating very well. That's first thing. Second thing, judicial reform. Everything we predicted happened. Constitutional Court is doing maximum damage it can do because now they have they lined up the decisions they want to do. They want to do decisions on blocking land law. They want to do decisions on abolishing the anti-corruption court. They want to do decisions on banking system, which is also very controversial. So they are there to do the damage. We prepared already in August the number of draft laws to get rid of this kind of constitutional court. First of all, to put state jacket on them, to make their procedure so difficult that they cannot do any good, but at least they cannot do any harm. But on the other hand, to make them part of the Supreme Court. This law we prepared had support of the US Embassy. Well, it's more controversial with Europeans, but hopefully it will be taken, it will be accepted. The
point is, these are plans, but do you think that
these are all
realized?
These are all the problem here is we have the law on construction permits. You know, there is a huge
we have many laws.
There is a huge possibility to get lots of investment in infrastructure, in building or construction. Okay, we just got money from EBRD. To start the most difficult, problematic part of the Odessa-Kiev road. And you know what? State architectural inspection gave no permission. And it couldn't have been done in summer. Can you imagine? One hand of the state is blocking the other hand of the state from doing things. So we have these things on that. The problem is that at National Rada of Reform, we vote for everything. Everybody's happy, everybody says perfect, and then it goes to Rada. Rada committees, the chairs that are there, and also even some opposition members say, perfect, we like it. Then in Rada, well, maybe, but... So the problem is where we are heading towards. We are in deep trouble. Because Ukraine, in comparison to the budget which is planned for this year at the beginning, we has up to 200 plus billion hryvnias deficit. For next year, I think it's up to 200 billion that is planned. IMF, now we're going to IMF and saying, well, we'll do just anything. Please, please give us money. We cannot do anything. That's the problem. We can promise just anything, but with this structure, with this mindset in Rada, with this mindset at the government, which I think that the Ukrainian government basically almost doesn't exist. Sorry, there's a total meltdown.
Tell that to Shmigal.
No, yeah,
Have you
there is a meltdown. I know that Denise, I respect him personally, but excuse me, the mandate. You had previous government that did lots of mistakes. You had a government after that which was told, you please don't move too much because then you're going to make mistakes. Ukraine cannot afford not to do much. Either government acts very fast, but the time is already lost. There is a meltdown.
So it's not going to be better.
It's not going to be better. We are heading towards a major, huge economic downturn that is going to happen within the next 3 to 5 months.
How bad
Very
is
bad.
it? How
Very bad because Ukraine doesn't have reserves. Ukraine has number of downturn factors that are going to make it as bad as it's possible. And then it's going to result into a huge economic crisis, but then of course a political crisis. So I think still President Zelensky has enough credit from the population, despite the results of local elections, which were predictably bad. But I think President Zelensky himself, for a number of other reasons, has enough credit from the people, and he can still do the reset.
And do you believe that he can do something? You really do think that he may do something, or he can?
Well, what is the alternative? The alternative is a meltdown not only of the economy and the political system, but of the state of Ukraine. And its disappearance. What's the alternative? I expect President to act. I hope he will act. We should support him in a very decisive act. On Constitutional Court, he really was quite decisive. I think what I liked about what he did is that he basically did quite a resolute legislation. Now in Rada it's kind of stuck, and then there's the issue. Either Rada passes it, or I'm sorry, but what's the use of such Rada? Then he should, and the thing is, like, look, on customs reform, we did very radical thing, on our National Customs Reform. The thing is, we are all imitating. We are all fans of process. We all applaud, we all vote, we all do things, and then nothing happens. Sorry, but I thought that most of my time was wasted because we did everything right. You cannot do 100% of it. At least everybody said we did everything right. I don't think so, but most of the people said. And then what? And then what? How long can we continue to imitate things? Ukrainians, and we are Ukrainians because I'm also Ukrainian, I have a citizen, and I spent almost 15 years of my life already in this country, and I love this country. But the thing is, we need to act fast. We need to act now. Ukraine is in not only deadlock, it's in a huge trouble. And we need to move. We need to move decisively. And you don't have to invent bicycles because all the respectable U.S. Embassy, British Embassy, all the others have very good recommendations. I'm sorry, IMF. Perfect. Let's do them. Oh, sorry.
That's the frustration also of business to a certain extent, because everybody understands in the business that everybody knows what to do. Everybody supports what needs to be done. But the point is that the fundamentals are not yet being constructed. It's
because there is a huge layer of middle to upper level of bureaucracy. Look, Ukraine spends up to almost 50% of GDP on state expenses. What are these things? Not only social expenses, which are very inefficient, but we have huge state sector, which almost all of them is losing money. Why it's still there? Because middle level of bureaucracy. I remember very well, Ivar Sambramievich, brilliant Minister of Economy, had good intentions, said, I'm firing head of Sumy Gazprom, Himprom. And the head of that state enterprise, which is always losing money, but the leadership is very rich, says, who the hell is the Minister of Economy? On the paper he can fire me, I'll fire him. And Ivaras was out within 2 weeks.
You see?
That's how it works in this country.
So it doesn't seem to be very optimistic, guys, I think so. But nevertheless, it's pretty realistic. So thank you very much for your realistic comments. And I wish actually there could be here with us both Razumkov and Zelensky. Unfortunately, both of them they are with COVID, so that's why it prevented them, according to the official reason.
COVID in many ways is liberating. I had it in a very light form and it liberated me. I have antibodies, so I can go around.
You see?
We
also said, but nevertheless, as far as I understand, business priorities are not on their agenda. But nevertheless, I hope that they will get the message also both from your side. I will switch my attention also to Kirill Shevchenko, and I can ask you, do you share the pessimism of Mikhail, or I would say in such a way, do you think that 2021 is going to be better to a certain extent? Will we resist the crisis? Will we avoid the crisis?
Okay, thank you, Ivana. And okay, let me express that I am more cautious, optimistic than so pessimistic forecast.
You have to be, you know.
yeah, we have to be. So we also, as a central bank, we should be more conservative. And so I would like to say that our forecast for the next year, in terms of the GDP, in terms of even for the budget deficit, is more conservative than the IMF forecast. Okay, so it's because of specific, and as I'm representative of state authority, let me switch to Ukrainian, please.
Okay. No problem.
Okay.
Well, it's really, there is the huge uncertainty which we have not only in Ukraine, is the new second or any other, whatever you name it, wave of COVID-19. This is the huge uncertainty. And because of this uncertainty, by the way, we are constructing our monetary policy. We may say that today, our monetary policy for the next time, for the following year, is the bilateral and two-sided, as if we are expecting for the further strengthening of the lockdown measures, it would be logical that it will lead to the situation that we'll have the decrease of the customers' demand and the economy won't be restored that quickly. Well, it's even now slowing down and the demand is going down. We can see that. Yes, and by the way, I may say that the indicators of the third quarter in comparison with the second quarter, because the biggest shock was in the second quarter, but we can see now, for instance, that the indicator of the GDP, which is in the third quarter, looks much better than in the second one. And if the decrease was 11 something in the second quarter in the annual mode, then in the third quarter it's 3.5. And we can see that in the third quarter the situation is restored a bit, and we also see the restoration of the demand and of the consumers, and we could see even the speed up of the loans. The loan portfolios in the banks in hryvnia growth has become 3%, which is the decrease, unfortunately, in the annual dimension, but still the third quarter witnessed that we may restore. So that is why today we are looking if we have the further decrease of the consumer's demand, then we can understand that as a central bank we need to respond. And we will use all of the mechanisms, beginning with our key rate and all the rest of the toolkit. Because our basic forecast, which we mentioned in October, that the next year will have the restoration of the economy, and it will impact the inflation issue, first of all, and we are even expecting that if everything is still at the same level, no, it won't. Then for us, one of the very big assumptions is the adoption of the law on the budget. And separately, I'd like to say that the increase of the minimum wages is one of the factors which will impact the inflation next year. If we see some other trend of the development of events, we have the full toolkit to use it and to lead it to the inflation indicators up closer to our aim. I will remind you that the inflation aim is 5 plus minus 1. So this is the deviation between 4 and 6%. So in all of those forecasts of ours, the key assumption is the continuation of the cooperation with an IMF. That's what I'd like to emphasize separately. So, considering that the banking system is working totally in the stable way, and we have enough of the currency reserves, we as the National Bank, we are ready for any development of events in the economy. But of course, we are expecting for the better. We are ready to respond in any case. So I do hope that the response as for the slowdown of the economy substantially will be rather temporary. Well, how temporary? Well, the biggest uncertainty is the dissemination of the disease and epidemiological situation. We can see that how the business responds on the lockdown of the weekend, as we say. I may say that for us, well, we are following all of those factors. And if I come back a bit to the beginning of this year, the biggest shock of this was already impacting the economy. So the business adapted to the work under the conditions of this lockdown. It was painful for the economy. We totally understand that. And we are ready to support it with our monetary tools. This is what's done by the central banks anywhere in the world. But still, you see, sometimes we hear such opinions. So let us just fund the needs of the business or the losses of the business. Let us compensate. So maybe some salaries, how the European countries do that for the companies who cannot afford it themselves, or let us cancel maybe some taxes for the business. And we understand that all of that will impact, in fact, the state of the budget. And sometimes we understand that we cannot afford it ourselves. So the question from me, are you ready to print money to the full extent to just to fund these growing needs, or it's not an option? Lately, I've got a favorite position of the law on national bank, Article 54.2, which is directly banning. I'm quoting it because I was mentioning it for lots of times, which directly is banning for the national bank to fund the deficit of the state budget. Moreover, this article, it is written directly and with the use of different state structures, if I can quote it like this. So the national bank of any country, and especially in the country which is not the country with the list of the currencies which are the reserve currencies, cannot afford itself to fund, with the help of the emission, the deficit of the state budget. So all of those are just blabbering. Yes, it's just, that's it. This is my total confidence of the National Bank of Ukraine. Okay, as far as I understand still, that 2021 will be hard. In a delicate way, if I formulate it like that, it won't be easier than 2020. Yes, looking at the situation which will be developing, we may use not only the monetary tools, we also have the list of measures which the National Bank has performed in the beginning of this year, the loan holidays and lots of other things, and we are ready to prolong those measures for the banks and the customers to be working easier under the conditions of any lockdown. Okay, got it. Thank you, Mr. Kirillo. I get the information that Mr. Prime Minister is with us, in touch. This is getting in touch with us, but so far we are trying to get to him. I'd like to ask Mr. Marty, would you please tell Mr. Ambassador, what do you think?
Is it going to be better next year? Is it going to be less difficult? What to expect?
It has to. It has to. Because again, it's pretty much also my personal, professional position or view. As a diplomat's job is to interact, to meet people, to discuss. And for our profession, of course, this COVID quarantine situation is the worst. I'd like to comment what President Saakashvili said about everybody knows what needs to be done, but there's this famous statement by Jean-Claude Juncker when he was the chair of the Eurogroup at the height of the Eurozone crisis a decade ago. And he famously said that we all know what needs to be done, but we don't know how to get re-elected after that. I'm a firm believer of political determination and political solutions. So if there's a political will, a determination to tackle all those issues, I think there's a way forward. From the EU-Ukraine standpoint, of course, the year 2020 in terms of trade, it's a business association discussion, right? Trade was not favorable. Ukraine's export to the EU went down by 18% and the import went down by 11%. But if you look at our trade agreement over the 5-year period that it has been in force, the trend is very, very positive. And next year we will together start a review process of the achievements of our trade agreement. And here it's very important that Ukrainian business would spell out clearly what are the expectations, how could our trade arrangements be improved and deepened. There are many possibilities and openness to discuss that. On the and now on what is happening within Ukraine. It was this, the first generation of political leaders in say, the Baltic countries in 1990s, and looking back at what was done, the universal lesson is, back then we said privatize, 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 but with the hindsight, the most important thing is the rule of law and stable institutions. And that, the year 2020 that is now ending made it all even more clear in Ukraine, right? Right. The wisdom of this. First of all, how the new anti-corruption institutions need to be trusted, need to be given time to perform the functions. It's humane that you want to see people put in prison quickly, but you need to give time for them independently to perform first. And then, of course, it has, especially the latest decisions by the Constitutional Court, have again laid out the bare need for a sweeping judicial reform of a court system in Ukraine altogether. And I don't believe in piecemeal solutions here. At the center of this reform, of this conundrum, are two bodies, the High Council of Justice and the High Qualification Council of Judges that must be reformed at the same time. And now there is this chance. The draft law is in the parliament. The president initiated that, so the president can also propose amendments, and the legal uncertainty around the anti-corruption institutions and the really bad need for judicial reform really should create the conditions for a sweeping reform. All international partners support that wholeheartedly.
By the way, actually, judicial reform and problems with courts is number one problematic issue which the business community has. It's for the first time ever we've put not fight with corruption, but judiciary system reform on the first place. And it seems to me this is something which also impacts also the opportunity of the banks as well to give proper lending. It gives other fundamental things which would move the economy forward. So this is the key.
Absolutely. Independent and accountable court system.
All right. And when it comes to the funding from the European Union, how the situation looks like from this standpoint? Do you think that without those necessary changes and reforms, Ukraine will get funding from the EU or not? Or you think that without IMF support and without reforms, Ukraine will never get it?
I again must quote the then Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, who said, I think it was in 2015, the more Ukraine reforms, the more the EU will support it, and support including financially. That is pretty clear. Almost all our support is linked with concrete reform paths, concrete things that need to be done, including the macro-financial assistance that we give. It was the latest one that was initiated last spring, entails 8 conditions that were discussed and ratified by the Ukrainian parliament. So let's do it. Let's do them. And again, the judicial reform looms large as well. So the EU supports financially the things, reforms that we mutually agree, and then Ukraine implements. That's as simple as that.
But when it comes to the COVID fight and this pandemic development, from the European standpoint, what do you think is the best experience Ukraine could get from European countries in order to apply here? What can you tell about that? Because obviously pandemic and COVID is number one as well priority for people and for governments, etc. And we need to understand what is the best experience.
First of all, let me highlight the 190 million euro COVID assistance that the EU has put together and has made available for Ukraine. But apart from that, or on top of that, there is Ukraine is already getting this experience and exchanging experience. Because part of the EU's offer was also Ukraine's observer status in the European Disease Prevention Authority. And Ukraine, and I'm very proud of that, took this opportunity very quickly and is very actively participating in these discussions. And it is exactly a body to exchange information, to share best practices. So Ukraine is already getting best practice. Of course, situation in each and every country is unique. Even when the pandemic is global, but the responses vary. Ukraine has all this experience and all this information that the EU countries are doing.
But gentlemen, we are still waiting for the Prime Minister to join in. But yes, please.
Okay,
yeah.
let me.
From the point of view of the mandate of the National Bank, I would say, one of the biggest interested state institutions in the judicial reform and anti-corruption reform. And that is very simple to explain why. The overall loan portfolio of the banks is approximately 1 trillion hryvnia. Okay, $40 billion US dollars equivalent. So we're doing everything to make the rate decreased. The access to the loans should be better, simpler and cheaper. But considering all of this judicial component, or I would say both judicial and law enforcement, the banks, to the price of their resources, they are adding the bonus for the risk. And the less we see the reformed judicial system, the higher is the bonus for the risk. So we, as the regulator of the financial markets, it's our direct interest to support this reform, as there is the protection of the loaner's rights. Partially it's in our hands, but mostly it's in the courts, in the law enforcement system, and also anti-corruption infrastructure. And the National Bank is not a stakeholder here, but it is also a very big fan of these reforms ongoing. Well, you're right, but what's happened? Do you also agree with President Saakashvili that the parliament is just the root of evil? They are only blocking the issue of the constitutional reform and judicial and other reforms. Or what's the issue? I never said that. No, the middle class maybe. The judicial reform we've prepared the unity of those bodies and the disciplinary bodies which they have and other ones. And the National Reforms Council proposed that, but the first response was that it is now harming our relationship with the judges, because the judges who heard that the National Reforms Council is preparing something like that, they will never answer our calls, and they will never perform what we are telling them to. So this logic's brought to the situation like this. How it happened? For about 30%, which when the presidential administration is calling, we are doing that, and all of that is not ours. And now they, after the local elections, said, okay, you've lost now, you are weak, and we will do whatever we were trying to do before. So I'd like to look where those people left. They will never do that, but Saakashvili should shut up, they say. Tell him that it's not interesting because we cannot provide this now and to change everything. We need to preserve what we have, but we cannot preserve what we don't have. We need to change everything, and now. It's a bit too late. Okay, got it. Well, yes, we can still try to find the root of evil for a long time, but our task is with the business and progressive institutions to make everything possible for those changes in our country to take place. So let us invite those guests whom we have online, in particular Mr. Sergei Marchenko. The Prime Minister will join us later and we will get in touch with him too. Mr. Sergei, the Minister of Finance of Ukraine, what do you think about 2021? Will it be better? Give us some focus, maybe positive points. Or will it be or will it be as bad as 2020? Well, thank you, Anna, for the invitation. I'm happy to be at the annual meeting. I've joined you just recently. It was interesting for me to hear the development of the situation and the impact of the budget policy, how the situation in 2021 will work. And I need to tell you that in spite of this year being very complicated according to all of the parameters, and we can see the economic dynamics is rather complicated, and it concerns not only our country, but the majority of the world countries. Our country, we may say, is the least, is in the lower median group of the countries which suffered of corona crisis, at least for now. So there are certain hopes that the decrease of the GDP forecast will be correspondent to the forecast indicators which we appointed in the beginning of the year. It would be less than 5%. Now we have all the reasons to expect for such a dynamics. And that is why I may say that from this perspective, this year, though it may be complicated, we did not have those losses which could potentially we could bear if we had a different structure of economy. From the perspective of the budget, I need to say that at the point we managed to catch up the lagging behind on the profits which we had as of the 1st of May. The sum was 44 million hryvnia for the performance of the planned indicators since the beginning of the year. Now we achieved the planned indicators, and I think that till the end of the year we'll have the revenue, maybe not that substantial, but still it will be in the state budget. Mostly it's done thanks to the work of the tax service and the part of the minimization of the schemes of tax evasion, I mean added income tax, considering that we have done it the myths and knowing that the state budget has certain delay in the reimbursement. But I will tell you that since the beginning of the year, we reimbursed all of the obligations which haven't been done during the previous periods. We are decreasing the tax debt with the VAT, and we will go on doing that. We want to be reliable partners in that. Sergey, look, I do apologize to interrupt you, but let us come back to your opinion. It will be really important in the context of the customs and the tax service. There are certain issues, but now I need to stop you a bit because the Prime Minister is sitting and ready to connect to our meeting, and we will come back to you after the Prime Minister's words, if you don't mind. Mr. Denis, have a good day. I'm happy to welcome you at the annual general meetings of the European Business Association, and I'm sincerely thankful that you found some time in your tense schedule to welcome the business and to provide certain messages about whether the next year, 2021, is better than 2020. Because we all understand that 2020 is not that easy for all of us, so we need certain focuses. We here in the studio have discussed certain issues, and one of the messages we'd like to send to you is that we need the changes in the context of the judicial reform, including the law enforcement, to produce this necessary foundation for the development of the business? And can we consider that those changes really can be implemented in the life next year? What's the milestone you're creating for us now? Hello, Ms. Anna, and dear presentees, the members of the European Business Association, dear colleagues and participants of today's annual general meeting. I'm happy to greet you, and I will begin with the gratitude words to the business which pays taxes in Ukraine, creates job places. Thank you all, dear investors and businessmen, the heads of their enterprises, because the times are hard. It's hard for everyone in the whole world, but in spite of that, the business in Ukraine is working. In particular, the participants of the European Business Association, the companies which traditionally for multiple years are working in the white segment of the Ukrainian economy, paying all the taxes and totally paying the white salary. The creating socially responsible projects, socially protected job places, and it really is worth attention of the government. And with huge respect, with huge gratitude, I'm taking part in this event today. And we have a very long story of relationship with the European Business Association. I've been its member of your respectful organization, and I understand the principles and the philosophy of the work. So I really think that we have really sincere relationship. So if we're speaking about the sincerity of the perspectives and what is awaiting for us and where we'll be moving on, I will tell you the following. We are doing lots of steps which we can characterize as the reforms. I do want to expect that the business really feels both those reforms, but the business feels both the complications which are connected with the corona crisis, economic crisis in the world. And of course, we are waiting for different ways and we are consulting. And I thank the EBA for their support, what we need to do, where we need to amend something when we are considering certain changes or improvements for the business in the current conditions. Unfortunately, today we need to state that the number of the sick people is unfortunately totally increasing. We have the weekend lockdown, and about 6 spheres within SMEs are suffering because of that. We have developed and we are going on developing several measures which will ease the situation for the employees of those businesses, but we also are developing the perspective tools and mechanisms for the SME and the bigger business as well will give certain opportunity to develop globally. We need to mention that the third quarter was more successful than the second one. 8.5% was an advantage. which Ukraine got of the increase of the GDP, I hope that this year will be over with this speed of growth, and the next year will have the growth of the GDP in comparison with the current year, when we have the decrease connected with the spring lockdown, the full lockdown in spring, the possible lockdown of the weekend, but we'd like to make it in an intellectual, clever way. We've just finalized a big meeting with the city heads and now with the heads of the region amalgamated territorial communities after the decentralization reform. So we are awaiting for certain tests because of the pandemics. We shouldn't hide that. We shouldn't be afraid of that. And the business says, try to be sincere with us and just warn us for us to be prepared beforehand. Of course, we'll conduct this dialogue, and if we see that according to all of the forecasts, this year will be, and the December will be very hard, and the system is working, and we are coming to the capacities of the healthcare to provide help to the citizens of Ukraine, it's obvious that we will have to provide certain measures as for the restrictions, as for the lockdown. And this is what we'd like to speak about with the business. And this is the best way when we have the association and the business can have the one voice and the same one unified voice with the mayors of the city and with the heads of the communities, amalgamated communities. When we present all of that, we will provide the dialogue. We are short of time. This dialogue should be very quick and rapid and rather open and sincere. As for the reforms, which we are expecting for in the next year. We'd like to speed up the process of the privatization, which is important for Ukraine and the business. The state is inefficiently managing its property. It's obvious, the majority of its property, I mean, and that is why this year we had a very efficient small privatization. I'm hoping that bigger, so-called bigger privatization will go on next year. We have the demand for that. The auctions are conducted in the e-form according to the principles of the Prozoro, and we have very nice results. I do hope that these open auctions without the corrupt components really are better for the business. As for the key reforms, we can see that the issues are connected with the customs, with the tax service, with the controlling authorities. Today, because of the pandemics, we have the moratorium for the checks, but we do understand that there is a certain problematics at the customs. Yesterday, in Wednesday, we had the new head of customs. He's from business, and today he's the ex-head of the Borispil airport, who has a really nice business background. He understands the need in the reforms of the customs service, and soon we will see and we will feel this reform in reality, live, because at the customs, according to the feedback of the business recently, these problematics used to be and it is now. So this is the step which we will provide this year. Digitalization. You've heard, and I'm sure you know, that it was announced by the president and the vice prime minister that the next year, in September next year, we are planning to create paperless economy, and in fact to provide the bureaucracy of the state without a use of any paper to be totally e-way. It is possible. We will move on in this direction, and it will critically speed up lots of the processes. We will provide other steps necessary for Ukraine to be, during the next several years, in the top 30 of doing business ranking. This is the cheapening and simplifying of the electrical networks and grids connection, the problematics for the business in all of the meetings, that is cheapening of the credit resources. I can see, and I give my greetings to the head of the National Bank, the rate of 6% is the record during the crisis year. So, of course, we have our common efforts, and the presidential office is working to create the maximum comfortable conditions in spite of the crisis, and we are going on doing that. We're working with the banks, and we will move on like this. And the reform, which is not that interesting for the business, but the corporatization of the state enterprises is an important reform which needs to improve the results of the state business. and the introduction of the supervisory boards, the corporate management, and separating of this business from the political impacts. Maybe some of the state enterprises will become members of the European Business Association. Maybe not next year, but at least a perspective. For me personally, it will be the sign of the high efficiency and consciousness of the state business, state-owned business, when it can be have the membership in such a respectful business association as the EBA. I would say that Naftogaz is the member, and Ukrainian Railways and UGV are the members of EBA. There are lots of progressive companies like this. So top 20 of the state business were members of EBA and maybe other progressive business associations. Let it be like this. Let it be our wish for the future, and it will seem to me that this business is progressive and it seems that it's efficient. Well, of course, we will go on with the reform of the energy sector, and of course we will support export. For today, we have moved along the philosophy of the idea of support of export from the simple decisions and solutions when our trade representatives and the ambassadors should promote the export of Ukrainian goods into the countries where they represent Ukraine, and not vice versa, import the goods of the countries where they reside. And also they need to attract investments. A very simple formula: promote Ukrainian export at the international markets, attract investments to Ukraine. This is the formula of the support of export through the diplomatic institutions and trade institutions. And of course we have the idea to create the analog of the export bank or export agency. And we have other ideas we are working on, and we will be grateful for any prompts or recommendations for the business how to implement this business in the better way. These are our plans. I'm sure that we will efficiently implement them together. I again greet the members of the European Business Association. I'm sure that this year was rather complicated, and at the annual meeting we will sum it up in spite of the complications and hardships. I want to believe that in lots of businesses there is certain progress done, there is certain vision and expectations and nice perspectives for the future. I wish all of you good health, of course, under the current situation. This is first and the foremost, and success for the flourishing of your business, the nice development and flourishing of the European Business Association. Thank you, Denis. I must say from my behalf and from behalf of the association that the business has the certain respect to you and your actions, and we can endlessly go on with this discussion because we have warm and nice relationship with you. We will be happily to provide support, both expert and information support about different aspects of the reforms. Please, you may ask us. I may only say that at the last meeting of the board, which happened on Monday, we were speaking whether we should introduce the full lockdown or to stay at the lockdown of the weekend. There were lots of debates about that, and the business, just for you to understand, said that yes, we consider that we need to have the healthcare system as number one priority. We need to develop it. We need to do everything possible for it to stand, to fund it properly, not to use the money from the healthcare sector for the other needs which can be found in other country. We need to purchase to stop the virus through other sources, in particular through the children. We need to pay attention to the kindergartens and the schools, so maybe we need to provide certain restrictions in this context. But in the business community, we understand that we are not the best experts whether we should close or not close the economy. We don't want to close it, to shut it, but if it's needed to provide the priority of the health, then we will understand the lockdown for a certain period of time. As we make jokes, it's better to have an awful end than the O without the end. So we need to communicate with you, for you to hear the opinion of the business and for us to hear your arguments, your logical arguments, and to support each other in such a hard environment during such hard times. Thank you, Mr. Denis. Thank you so much to you. I was happy to see Mr. Ambassador, Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary Ambassador. I give greetings to you and thank you for the cooperation. Thank you so much. I'm rushing to go on with my work. Thank you. Have a good evening. So, dear friends, we've listened to some interesting points from Mr. Prime Minister, and let's now come back to the Minister of Finance, Mr. Sergei Marchenko. As you've heard, oh, I can see we have Josta with us. Of course, we would like to see Josta as well. But if Sergei is ready, let us say a couple of words what we should expect in the customs and in the tax service. Now, should we expect for the new high-quality tax service, which will focus upon the service, a nice high-quality service for the customers, I mean taxpayers, and what should be expected in the customs? Thank you, Anna. Well, of course, we could expect for the high-quality service, both tax and customs, and we're doing everything possible for that. We're doing our best without forgetting the main function of this function. This function is to fill up the budget with the taxes. So considering sometimes a rather low culture of tax paying, I would say that as a Minister of Finance, of course, that we have certain questions to the fair character of tax paying, both in the customs and in the tax sphere. We have some unfair and dishonest employees of customs and tax service, and the law enforcement should fight with that. But it should be the two-side street, and I consider that the results of this year witness. If you make an order in a certain sphere, it has a cumulative effect, and it allows to expand the opportunities, decreasing the debt burden for the state. As for the current situation, I'd like to add a couple of words. Our situation is rather hard, mostly. We are going on with our negotiations with our partners from the IMF, trying to approximate the indicators of the budget deficits and other parameters and indicators we are having. This is an ongoing daily discussion, and I am hoping that soon we will achieve the result, the outcome of this result, of this discussion, and we will have the budget for 2021, which will be real for their accomplishment and for performance, because it's important, and the budget which performs the key functions to provide the economic development, the opportunities for the citizens, for the business, and the budget which won't be the budget which cannot be accomplished. This is the main point. The budget should be realistic. We're doing our best for that, cooperating with the parliament. I do hope that till the end of the year, the budget will be adopted in the addition which will allow to implement it. If there are any questions, I'm ready to answer them. Sergei, thank you. I may say that maybe we'll have a separate meeting with you, because it's very interesting to listen in more details how the events are developing. At this meeting, I'm not sure that it will be reasonable, because this is a kind of an main event of the year, lots of speakers here, so we'd better have a separate meeting to focus upon the competence of the Minister and Ministry of Finance. And for now, I thank you sincerely that you found some time. I hope that you've restored after COVID, because COVID, you know, is a kind of a new disease when everybody has that sickness, and it's not a surprise anymore. I wish you nice health, strong health, a very quick recovery. I'm sure that you already recovered, considering that you're actively going to work, and see you soon. Thank you. I consider that everybody needs to stay healthy, not to get sick. COVID is not the new disease. It's more of a complicated disease than just sneezing. So I would wish you not to have this disease. Thank you. Health to everyone. Thank you for the invitations. Thank you, Sergei. Have a good day. Let us move on. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Josta Lundgren, resident representative of the IMF.
Now, what's going to be next year? Is it going to be better? But it also depends very much on whether IMF is going to support Ukraine or not. So how the situation is developing with regards to Ukraine-IMF relationships, and do you see light in the end of the tunnel?
I think question if it's going to be better next year. It could be rephrased. Could it get any worse than it has been this year? I mean, in our latest projections, we project a global contraction this year of 4.4%. But I mean, we are seeing now some hopeful developments when it comes to vaccine developments, and we are projecting a recovery in the global economy, and we're also projecting a recovery in the Ukrainian economy. But I mean, basically, this has been just a very, very difficult crisis because it has been, I mean, there's been a health crisis. So, I mean, there hasn't been any choice but basically to do what it takes to save lives and save livelihoods. It's also a global crisis, so there are a lot of spillovers. No country has been able to has been protected from this crisis. But luckily, what we see is there has been quick and massive reaction to this. So globally, the fiscal support has been an unprecedented $12 trillion.
Where are you? Josta? The connection is lost. Друзі, де Josta?
Dear friends, where is Josta? Josta, where are you? Well, we have a nice picture now. Well, he's from Sweden. He's changed his image.
We quickly adopted this current standby arrangement in June this year. But I think there are a few aspects of this crisis that I think are worth mentioning. And the first one is this crisis and Ukraine's experience from this crisis really shows the importance of counter-cyclical policies and of going into a crisis with strong fundamentals and room to provide stimulus. And I mean, Ukraine, all the hard work that was done after the previous 2014 and 15 crisis paid off. Ukraine had relatively good fiscal position with debt to GDP ratios of around 50% and a low fiscal deficit. A lot of the vulnerabilities and the imbalances in the economy had been eliminated. Inflation was low. The exchange rate was not misaligned. There was confidence in the economy from global confidence in Ukraine's economy, and also the banking sector was in good shape thanks to all the work that had been done. I see the screen is frozen. Can you still hear me?
No, we hear you.
Okay,
it
good.
was frozen a few minutes ago, but
All
now
right,
it's okay.
Okay. So, and really, I mean, this crisis, as opposed to previous, the 2008 and 2014-15 crisis, did not trigger a banking crisis, which is a testament to the good work that was done by the MBU. The other reflection that I think is worth making is that this is a temporary crisis. So the crisis will be gradually resolved when there is a cure for the virus. That means that it's important that the support that is being provided is also temporary and can be phased out once the crisis passes. Also, what we've seen is that it's uncertain how long this pandemic goes on and what it will take to meet it. So it's important to keep some of the powder dry, so that when there is a second or third wave of this pandemic, that there is an ability to provide support. Then the third thing to keep in mind is that it is important to provide economic support, but it's also important not to lose sight of the importance of long-term stability and not allow the support to jeopardize the stability. Then the final thing I want to say, and I want to pick up on the good points that were made earlier on the obstacles to investment and growth, and also give a shout out to the excellent investor survey that has been done with the support of EBA. And I mean, for a 5th year in a row, we see that investors, they are concerned about the judiciary, the corruption and oligarchic structures in the economy. And it's clear that these issues will have to be tackled and will have to be resolved in order for long-term growth to materialize. So those are issues that are very high on the agenda in the fund-supported program, and issues that we work towards resolving.
But Josta, maybe I didn't get it right. Do you think that money will arrive this year? Most likely money will not arrive to Ukraine, but next year, will it be available? Do you think so?
Anna, you should know by now that we don't conduct our negotiations in public.
But still, I needed to ask in order to understand at least. We know the specifics, but nevertheless, I wanted you at least to say something in this regard. At least to give some green light, I don't know, some light to the business, maybe to make our life a little bit easier.
I mean, it's I think as our managing director communicated earlier this week, we have an ongoing dialogue with the authorities about what needs to be done in order to unlock this review. Once that is in place, we will be able to move forward with the program. Also, as Ambassador Matti said, I mean, we are supporting reforms. We are supporting a reform of and so those reforms need to happen.
You know, it's like with everything in Ukraine, everybody supports everything, but nevertheless the ball is still in the air. So let's see how it goes. Further, thank you so much, Josta, for your insights. So let's move forward on the agenda. We have 2 more ambassadors of G7, and I suggest that they step into our discussion. I'd like to plug in or launch into the discussion Christina Kvien, Chargé d'Affaires of the United States of America Embassy in Ukraine. So, Christina, very happy to welcome you at the event of European Business Association. I'm so happy you made it, and you have so dramatic, not dramatic, but fundamental changes in your home country. And I'd like to say, what kind of change do you see, what kind of impact it would have on your lives in your United States of America, and obviously what can it bring to the world and to Ukraine in particular? And do you think, again, coming back to the topic of the discussion, is it going to be better in 2021? Oops. It's not. It's the answer to the question. Так. Что? Чекаем.
Okay, so far we are waiting.
Christina? Christina? Can you hear us? Hello?
I'm frozen. I can't hear anything.
Oh, now do you hear? Is connection restarted? No, now we don't hear you.
Sorry, I can hear you now. It cut off.
Good. Have you heard the questions?
The question. Sorry about
Good.
that.
So you have you have the very fundamental changes in the U.S. and what kind of impact it has on the lives of regular citizens in the United States, and then what kind of impact it would bring to the world, it would have to the world, and in particular to Ukraine. And coming back to the topic of the discussion, do you think that 2021 is going to be better than the current year?
Well, thank you. Interesting question and an interesting conversation. I find myself agreeing with a lot of the panelists here today. I'll just say, first of all, I'm an optimist. And so with the good news that we've had on vaccines in the past couple weeks, I do very much hope that 2021 will be better than 2020 in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully fairly early in the year, we can get to a point where we are seeing reduced numbers rather than increasing numbers. As you know, I'm sure the United States is facing extremely challenging situation with COVID right now, as is Ukraine and many European countries. So I think all of us getting past that will be an enormous benefit, both to the economy and also, frankly, to our societies, being able to get back to business as usual. In terms of U.S.-Ukraine relations, I mean, the good news is that Ukraine enjoys bipartisan support in the United States Congress. And although we will have a new Congress coming in January, I don't anticipate any changes in the bilateral support that Ukraine already enjoys. I think all indications are that Ukraine will continue to be an important country for the United States, that we will continue to support Ukraine's reform agenda, continue to support Ukraine's security, and continue to support Ukraine's Euro-Atlantic integration. So I look forward to the time, as Mati said, it's difficult for us and for me to do my job with COVID because I can't get out and meet people in person as much as I'd like to, but I look forward to the time when I can. And in the meantime, I appreciate the real advances we've made in being able to do these things remotely and through digital technology. So I'm optimistic. I think 2021 will be better than 2020. And I think U.S.-Ukraine relations will continue to be strong and supportive.
Great, very good to hear that. But anyhow, I'd like to ask you the following. To a certain extent, we see sliding down with certain reforms, or there is a pace which is much less evident compared to what it was in the past, at least last year or in the beginning of the year. Is there some sort of fatigue or the same impression which you have actually in the embassy of the United States of America, or do you feel certain fatigue towards Ukraine, or you are happy with what's going on in the country?
I feel no fatigue towards Ukraine. I'm happy to work as hard as ever. I think the United States is equally ready to work with Ukraine and continue to support reforms. I would say that the challenges that are presenting themselves right now in terms of reform partly are somewhat natural, because very early in any administration, there's a lot of energy and momentum. And then, as administrations go on, there are countervailing forces that don't like to see reform moving so quickly. There are certain vested interests here in Ukraine that are comfortable with the way things have been in the past. And I think that those vested interests are, frankly, trying to push to keep the administration from accomplishing some of the reforms that it has set out to do. So I can say that from the U.S. perspective, we are doing our best to be supportive, not only with continuing the reform agenda that the president has set out, but also I would say to protect the reforms that have been made in the past. Unfortunately, what we're seeing right now is some vested interests really pushing to actually roll back.
Again, the screen is frozen. On the very interesting point. Ребята, восстанавливается само.
Will the connection restore itself?
I can continue after them.
But do you think that the U.S. Will be helpful to Ukraine when it comes to combating vested interests? Because obviously U.S. has very strong instruments to leverage many things in the world. So do you think that you will jump in and will help Ukraine to cope with vested interests?
Sure, I would argue we've already done some of that already. And I think we will continue to work to help Ukraine fight its own vested interests. I mean, ultimately, it can't just be us. It has to be a shared effort, but we certainly are here to help in various ways to fight the vested interests that don't want to see reform move forward.
That's very nice to hear. Thank you so much, Christina, and look forward to the cooperation with you in the coming months and years. Thank you, and good luck to you. And the main thing is to stay strong and be healthy. Let's move further, and I'd like to invite to the conversation Melinda Simons, Ambassador of the United Kingdom to Ukraine. Melinda, are you here? Very nice to hear.
Thank you.
To see you.
Good. So I'll try and talk briefly to answer the questions that you put. Looking ahead to 2021, I think the main thing that I want to talk about is that I don't think there'll be just one reality for next year. I think that countries that dealt with COVID differently will experience the economic downturn that the world is going to experience very differently. And I also think that while the economic impact of COVID has already been pretty severe on countries, we haven't yet had the final bill, not in Ukraine, not by any means in most countries. It is still playing itself out. So that makes it even more important that sustainable economic growth is secured for Ukraine and that the economic performance that we've been encouraging and supporting is long-term, accompanied by productivity growth. I think that whether we shape the new normal next year or we have to adapt to it, the main point, probably the most important point, is how we work together to do that. I think it's going to be incredibly important for the Ukrainian government to keep an honest dialogue going with its partners and work with them on effective solutions to the country's problems. At the global level, this is a thing that the UK has been focusing on, particularly when it comes to COVID. And probably one of the main examples of that is global vaccination supply, which is going to be one of the most important factors, as Christina said, in graduating out of the situation that we have all found ourselves in for most of 2020. So I'm really pleased that Ukraine has signed up to the COVAX scheme because I think COVAX embodies that coordination. And I think it will help Ukraine to access some of the vaccine that it will need once production and distribution begins. To be honest, I think the other thing we're all going to need in 2021 is just patience, because there aren't going to be any quick fixes to COVID any more than there isn't a silver bullet to the current constitutional crisis that Ambassador Massikas was talking about. There are going to be false starts and there is going to be resistance as we all put forward our plans for graduating out of COVID, and we need to be prepared for that and we need to work through it. Like others, in terms of supporting businesses in this new reality, I think the most important thing to do is to not let up on reforms, because not only does it give Ukrainian businesses their best possible chance for survival, I also think, and of course your survey has borne out, that it's top of the list of things that foreign business partners and investors look at. And Ukraine is really going to need fresh foreign investment to help boost its recovery post-COVID. And judicial reform, as others have already talked about, is also top of the list, of course, and it's top of our own list. It's the single thing that would persuade British investors to think again about Ukraine, with tackling corruption closely behind. And the president and the government have made really clear their intention to build back better in terms of anti-corruption. And that is going to be equally important for investor confidence next year. And that's not just a short-term boost. In the long term, tackling those issues is also going to help stabilize the economy. And on that, I would caution not to fall into the protectionist trap, because trying to learn economic lessons from history is notoriously difficult, but I am not myself aware of any instance where a wholesale raising of barriers to trade has ended well for the global economy. Our economies have become more dependent on each other than ever before. They are closely interwoven. So the impact of a trade war would be even worse. The UK has traditionally been an advocate for free trade and will continue to argue in support of that, a rules-based international trading system as an independent voice in the World Trade Organization. I think for the UK and Ukraine, the biggest step forward has been the signing of our strategic partnership agreement, because that means right now that the two countries' businesses are going to be able to trade on the same terms after we leave the EU single market and customs area as they could before. And that gives the kind of certainty that businesses like to see in troubled times. And at the same time, UK Export Finance has doubled its export financing cover for Ukraine to £2.5 billion across all sectors. So that makes Ukraine a more attractive partner for British businesses. And along with our international partners, we're looking to help in international terms to support the rebooting of the judiciary and strengthening of anti-corruption institutions, and we'll continue with that help. Just a minute on the positive sides of quarantine, if we can talk about positive sides. And I think there are two. One is about challenging people's assumptions about the way they work. Some work requires a human presence, but not all of it does. And there is a real opportunity for employers and workers in that, even as you manage the risks to physical and mental health of prolonged home working. But the environmental benefit, which is my second point, which it comes about as a result of less commuting, less air travel, lower energy consumption, are all good things for Ukraine, not least because Kiev remains among one of the most polluted capital cities in the world. So this openness to thinking about environmental issues as a result of the pandemic is a real opportunity for Ukraine. Just to finish, you'll be aware that our Prime Minister yesterday announced a £12 billion plan to transform the UK's green economy, including ending the sale of petrol and diesel cars. One of the big moments in 2021 is going to be COP26. And I know that the Environment Minister has been talking to the Finance and the Economic Development Ministers about what Ukraine's Grow Back Greener package might look like for that summit. I think that it's economic decisions that are greened like that will help safeguard the environment for future generations, as well as addressing the challenges of shifting weather patterns, biodiversity loss and public health. And that, for me, could be one of the most positive things to come out of this pandemic. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda. Have you managed to notice that the second part of our panel contributes to the gender balance? Because actually we have so many women speaking on the panel. This is really very, very great, I would say, in such a way. Thank you. Since we have really very short of time, I would like to continue moving on with the program. And I would like to ask Vera Platonova to join in and share either optimism or the pessimism with regards to the next year. Vera is the Senior Vice President of Visa, and I'd like to ask you, what do you think? Is it going to be better?
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to congratulate association with the majority. So 21 is the right age already. And I would like to share some positive news. So yes, this year was very, very difficult from the global perspective and from the financial world perspective. But as we see at the banking sector and as we see its financial flows in the country, I would like to echo what Josta said. Yeah? So banks and overall financial sector managed to pass through these difficult times in a good shape. And there are two reasons to this. The first reason is that banks been prepared. So as we see from technological perspective, from the perspective of their passion to drive innovations and overall readiness of the systems, Ukraine is one of the best samples in the region. So you definitely notice how fast we moved to digital payments when lockdown happened. And one of the reasons that years financial sector been working to be prepared to this. we see that Ukraine is one of the best samples of smooth transformation into this digital economy. And still there is a long way ahead. Still there are a lot of big businesses and small medium businesses, which is definitely a priority for 2021, to become more digitalized. Still we are very like agile in making this happen. And another big plus is that the government and overall central bank, they've been uh, like enabling financial institutions to become successful, not interfering or regulating where there is no sense and interfering where it's important. So today I was just giving an interview to Central Asia journalists, and I told them that Ukraine is a real sample how the transformation in such a crisis period should happen.
Thank you, Vera. And did you change something for yourself and for your family in order to be more strong and more prepared for the next year? Maybe some lessons you can give to the audience as well?
Yeah, for sure. This year it's a big lesson for any company and any family. Yeah, but this year is really progress for me in terms of work-life balance because I travel much less, and I hear this from all my colleagues throughout the year. But the best lesson I took from this year is that work at home and work from anywhere, yeah, not only, but not in the office, really is effective. And I recommend all corporations, all government institutions, and I see that some of them still like trying to keep this old model that you should be every day in the office. Please trust your people and let your people build their own effective schedule, and they will meet the target.
Excellent. On this positive note, on this positive moment, I'd like to complete and end up and pack up the second panel. And I would like to thank all our panelists who took part today in our discussion. And I'd like to come up to the final very important moment of our meeting is to announce results of your elections of the board members to the European Business Association. Я перейду на українську мову.
So now I will be speaking Ukrainian. I would like to give the floor to Ms. Inna Novak, who is the managing partner, how do you say, managing partner, right, of the company, the managing director of the Grant Thornton Ukraine. Ms. Inna, please, the floor is yours. Would you please announce all of the winners, those lucky ones who got to the board of the European Business Association? Thank you, Lena. So I welcome all of the participants of the annual meeting, and I have an honor to announce the results of the voting process of the selection of 8 members of the board of the European Business Association among 19 candidates which were nominated. The voting was held at the online platform Election Body from the 3rd till the 16th of November this year. And in the voting, there were 193 out of 606 members of the European Business Association, which were almost 32% of the overall number. According to the acting statute, the association the elections of the board members was the one which took place, and they were acting if 30% of the members took part in it. So finally, the biggest number of votes, according to the results of the voting online, was got and were selected to the board members of the European Business Association: Alessandro Zanelli, Nestlé Ukraine. We welcome you. Alexei Kredisov, EY. Olena Voloshina, IFC. Tino Tsaiske, Metro Cash and Carry, Ukraine. Maciej Tomasz Zelinsky, Siemens Ukraine. Taras Kitsmay, SoftServe. Mauro, yes, we greet you. Mauro Longobardo, ArcelorMittal Kryvyi Rih. And Sergei Gontar, Philips Ukraine. We greet you, the selected new board members, and we do hope, with huge expectations, we're expecting for fruitful work, which is always demonstrated by the European Business Association. We greet you and thank you. Thank you. So, dear friends, and now it's high time to have a glass of champagne. I do invite everyone to meet, well, if you are here physically present in the Intercontinental Hotel, but as for all the rest, we'll have at our home offices celebrating our victories, or maybe not that big victories, because not everybody got to the board, but still, honestly speaking, all of you are cool candidates in the board of the association. We all respect you and love you, but we still had only 8 vacancies. Not everybody could get there. So I wish everyone to have a strong health, big happiness and inspiration and enthusiasm to overcome the next year in the same way or even better than the previous one. Thank you and see you soon again. But during our network at the Meet platform, we'll have a lottery.